I think a lot of people who would be watching this had no idea what Grove Press was. Can you just give us a
Well,
little?
Grove Press was pretty well known as a publishing company. They published Evergreen Review, the magazine. They had authors like Samuel Beckett, Ionesco, and Barney Rossett was famous for fighting censorship. Lady Chatterley's Lover, Henry Miller books. And while I was at Grove, I was served with papers on Titicut Follies. It was constant, fighting censorship. And he also bought a lot of pornography, real pornography, but then he bought I'm Curious Yellow for $25,000, and of course made millions of it, which was his downfall because he felt he knew everything about film and it overexpanded. He bought the building on the corner there so I could look into my office window from my bedroom. And anyway, after 3 years, he did a purge, and every week, like 10 people would be fired, and 1 week, it was me. And then I was out of a job for about 9 months. That was the point that I went to see Rugoff about a job. And I thought he was starting a film circulating program for sending films into colleges. What you told me what that was?
Non-theatrical.
Yeah, non-theatrical. Yeah, I thought you have the perfect background for this. I was at MoMA. I did this at Grove because I had moved from being his assistant to being in the film department with Edith Zorno. I don't know if you know Edith Zorno. Anyway, I told you what he said to me. You worked for a failing company, and one of my colleagues had died, a guy by the name of Jay. I don't remember his last name. And he said, and you have an association with death. So he hired my son's friend from Yale, Gene Donnelly, and I was pretty devastated by that. And then Edith Zorno, whom I'd worked with at Grove, called me because they were doing a program called Movies in the Parks, and they needed somebody to program that. And that's how I went to Lincoln Center to program Movies in the Parks. And then Sally Blumenthal, Sally Walensky at that point left, and they needed somebody to replace her. And I got the job at the Film Society in 1971, and I was there pretty much running the show for 32 years.
Good morning. Nice to see everybody. God, what a collection of old friends. Before I begin, I just wanted to thank Ira Deutschman for the footage. Thank you for making it available to us today to see her. Thank you. I'm Wendy Keyes, and I'm honored to be able to welcome you all to Joanne's memorial in the Walter Reed Theater. It is very appropriate that we have gathered to salute her in this room. Joanne oversaw every detail in the creation of this still extraordinary theater. The seats, the rake, the movable panels, the color scheme, the screen, all are the results of Joanne's creative input. I can feel her in every inch of this room. Joanne and I were close, close, close. We shared offices in 3 buildings for over 37 years, and I believe I spent more time with her than I did with my 2 husbands combined. Maybe that was a good thing. We spent wonderful and terrible times together, and in these last few weeks, a cascade of these memories have overcome me. She's, for me, a fierce advocate, a teacher of countless life lessons, a style setter. She had impeccable taste, perfectly groomed, with a penchant for Japanese fashion that she pulled off beautifully. She was also a candid editor of my love life, and both a dear and intimate friend, and let's face it, a parent. In the tributes that have preceded this day, we have already heard about her determination and her feistiness in fending off anything she didn't believe was in the best interests of the Film Society and in the staff. All that is true. One story that comes to mind was a confrontation between Joanne and a Lincoln Center lawyer. We were about to move from our offices into this building from the underground bunker that we inhabited for miserable years across the street on 65th Street. And we're so looking forward to coming to this beautiful building. The lawyer said that dogs wouldn't be allowed in the building, and Joanne said the Film Society was not moving into the building without CJ Impavito, the little wire-haired terrier that lived in Tony's office every day. And voila, the dog had a rousing welcome on moving day thanks to Joanne's standoff. It has to be said that there was a very warm and generous side to her. She adored the staff and entertained us lavishly in the city and in her home in Fire Island. We were her brood. If any of us were in any kind of jeopardy, she would leap to our defense. She wrote a scathing and brilliant letter to one of my doctors, chastising him for a misdiagnosis, something I could never, ever do. Professionally, she gave me so many opportunities: the gala to direct, the ability to travel around the world, and film series to program. I was so fortunate to have her in my corner, and I was in hers. She loved the movies, but she was also good with administrative details, creating a commune kind of operation with a small, hardworking staff. She managed budgets well, moved projects forward, and reported to a supportive and sometimes compliant board, which she had more or less handpicked. Joanne and I socialized with each member in different ways, maintaining their continued interest and financial support. She was an expert example of how to keep those channels open. She had so many qualities. She was an excellent cook. Many of us remember her cassoulet, which she and Dick perfected. She loved to sew. She was an inventive limerick poet, and she was a spicy woman. She was proud, as you could see, of her role in launching I Am Curious Yellow when she worked at Grove Press, and she was fearless in defending our exhibition of X-rated films at the New York Film Festival. In fact, one of the raunchiest was a French film named Exhibition. In fact, and then she went on to defend our screening of Oshima's In the Realm of the Senses. She loved the battle. She really loved the battle. And she loved men, too. Most profoundly, of course, her darling Dick, but her latest and last crush was on Ari Melber. Good pick, Joanne. After her retirement in 2003, she maintained strong and warm relationships with several staff members and her other friends from the Film Society. She also played a role during that time in the oversight of the construction of the Elinor Bunin Munroe Film Center, a beautiful success story. She initiated and co-edited the invaluable resource book, 50 Years of the New York Film Festival. It was a massive job, beautifully illustrated, and with the contributions of staff and film festival programmers, both past and present. I refer to it constantly and recommend that you all buy one if you don't have it. Her love for her family ran deep. The strength of her marriage to Dick was something marvelous to behold, full of pride and passion. Andrea was her adored stalwart and true caregiver in the end. Dick's clan was her clan as well. She was so proud of all of you. She loved to share many, many stories about her grandchildren, and I do look forward to hearing some of those today. Her death was a shock, but not a surprise, as they said about Queen Elizabeth, but Joanne wouldn't appreciate the parallel. We were so connected that there have been many times since her death that I have to feel that I have to call her to share something that I can share with no other, and then I remember. We were shoulder to shoulder through such difficult times, most acutely the loss of her darling daughter, Michelle. We prevailed together during the tumultuous Richard Roud finale, but we also celebrated together the joys of our work in Cannes, at our galas, and even in this room. When we projected the first film snippet, it was the Apocalypse Now helicopter scene with Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries blaring. We cheered and we wept. It was so exciting. And I wept when I heard of her death in a complicated way. I now have less love in my life. I will miss her forever. Oh, Michael Barker's coming to speak to you.
First of all, I want to say how grateful we are to have Wendy Keith. Her contribution to the city of New York and our lives is incomparable, and she's very self-effacing. So I thank you for everything. Everything Wendy said, I was going to say, so I'm going to do something a little different. Everything Wendy said, I was going to say, so I'm going to say something different. So, first of all, I never know what to say at these things. And as Wendy said, I want you to stop for a moment and look around this room. The size of the screen, it has perfect sound, by the way. Even the lights on the side. The seats, remember those? Wendy picking those seats? Oh my God. The concession stand. This room is one of the great rooms to see movies in America. It is. And when I sit in this room and I look at the flowers and I see all of you, this is the house that Joanne Koch built. That's a fact. And what a legacy. What a legacy. And for me, Joanne Koch was a rock. The rock of Lincoln Center. She was fearless, as Wendy said, really fearless. I remember a story when we brought Akira Kurosawa to the New York Film Festival for the opening night of Ran. Kurosawa went into Alice Tully Hall and he did the press conference. And at the end of the press conference, there was a great tumult in the lobby, and Joanne Koch was at the center of it. Basically, it was pronounced that the eye of a hurricane was going to hit Lincoln Center at about an hour before the first screening at Avery Fisher Hall of Ran. And Joanne was surrounded by all these people, staff people, journalists. There were people, you know, with opinions, all telling her she had to shut the event down that night. And it was already storming like crazy. She had to shut it down that night. And Mr. Kurosawa and Audie Bach, who was his translator, they walked into the lobby, and he just stood there like this. He was really tall. Joanne was like this. And he stood there, and he had a little smile on his hands, on his face. And Joanne was like, there is no way in hell I am stopping this event tonight. It is the first time that the opening night party is going to be a Tavern on the Green and not in the New York State Theater, and that is going to happen. They said, but Joanne, the hurricane's going to hit. No problem. If people have to swim to Tavern on the Green, they're going to swim to Tavern on the Green. And Kurosawa's looking at this, and she doesn't know. She was always nervous. Joanne was a very shy person, and she was always very nervous about being with the major talent. So she didn't know what to say. Kurosawa was like standing next to her. So she said, what does he think? And Audie Bach asked him in Japanese, and he turned and smiled, and this was his line. It appears to me that Mrs. Koch and I are the only people here who know the nature of big storms. And I agree with her. And basically, the rains came, and it was really, really horrible. The first screening at Alice Tully Hall started, the rains disappeared, and the weather was beautiful for the Tavern on the Green, and it was a very triumphant night, you know. And then another time when she was fearless, she called me up all excited. She sounded so excited, so happy. Michael, there are 8,000 nuts threatening to come to Lincoln Center today with pickets to picket Hail Mary. I can't wait. You want to come and join me? I said, Joanne, I think you should be worried about this. But did not faze her. There were no battles she was not up for. She was also very cagey, you know. She always got what she wanted, but she would do it sometimes she'd do it in a sneaky sort of way because she didn't want to ruffle feathers. So I remember once she called me up and she said, Michael, I want to do something I've never done with the board of Film Society of Lincoln Center. I would like you to come and explain to the board everything you do. I think they need to know what you do as a distributor. I said, you sure, Joanne? She said, yes, I would like you to come and do that. And there's the board meeting. And I said, okay. So I spent all this time preparing, I got to go to the board of Lincoln Center and present what I do for a living. And I was just working on it. Unbeknownst to me, the previous board meeting, apparently there was a big fight that Joanne had with several members of the board who were not happy with the selections of Richard Pena and his selection committee. And they wanted a say in the selection. And Joanne gave a speech that was something like, over my dead body, you know. And it was, you know, this is church and state. I didn't know any of this, but this war had happened. So I go to the board meeting. I have all my papers. I'm a little nervous. I was very young then. And I go in, I sit down, and Joanne has planted Irwin Young at the front to ask the first question. And she says, okay, we're going to do questions first, Michael, and then you can do your presentation. So Irwin Young says, Michael, can you explain to me what you think the integrity of the New York Film Festival is all about? And I said, oh, that's easy. Basically, the committee chooses a film, and whether I like the choice or don't like the choice, and whether you like the choice and don't like the choice, the integrity of the selection is sacrosanct, and that is different from every other festival I know in America. I answered the question. Joanne says, thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. She gathered my papers. She pushed me out of the door. She says, I love you. Close the door. She planned that. There is no question she planned that. And she knew everything that went on around here and everything that went on in Lincoln Center. And you know, she was in charge of all the tickets for opening night of the film festival. She knew where 2,700 people were sitting on Avery Fisher Hall. And I always would be very privileged. She'd give me a ticket or two, and I'd go, you know, and I'd go. And one year I went. One year I couldn't go, but I didn't want to tell Joanne. So I gave the tickets to someone. Next day, I get a call. You were not sitting in your seat in Avery Fisher Hall. If you ever do that to me again, I will never get you a seat again for opening night of the New York Film Festival. The next year is Down by Law, is the opening night of the New York Film Festival, and I get a seat in the first tier opposite where the talent is in Avery Fisher Hall, and Spike Lee is sitting next to me. And the movie's about to start, and Spike says, look, there are two really good seats down there. Let's just go down there and sit down there. I said, Spike, There is no way I'm doing that, and I advise you not to do that because Joanne Koch will never invite you to the film festival again. He looked at me, but he did not move. And we stayed there. We stayed there. You know, Joanne was a real role model for me, for Marcy, for Tom. What she taught us, you know, she never put herself at the center of attention. She always worked behind the scenes. She was the kind of hidden puppet master. Now, all the people in this room, we knew what she was doing, but the people on the outside, they had no idea she was kind of running the show and running everything. And we learned a lot, Tom and Marcy and myself, watching her. And you know, I see a lot of you in this room, when she picked you out and she decided that you were with her, her loyalty was incredible. And she seemed to know certain things about you that were totally unsaid. I mean, I will always be indebted to her for many reasons. But one is she introduced Tom and myself to Marcy Blum. And we became partners as a result of that. And she was sure of it. She was sure it was a perfect match. Now, Marcy was not sure it was a perfect match, right, Marcy? The last few times I saw her, she had retired. And before the pandemic, Alice Tully Hall, when you walked into Alice Tully Hall to the movie, there was a bench on the side, and then the restaurant was behind. And Joanne Koch would get a ticket for herself. Probably Maria got it for her, or Eugene. Get a ticket, would sit on that bench, and be kind of unobtrusive. I also liked going to the film festival and continue to like kind of sneaking in and going to see movies. And the last several times I saw her, I would see her on the bench, and I would go and sit next to her. She was very shy. That's something people don't really talk about. And we would talk to each other, but it would be in shorthand. And when you have that kind of relationship in shorthand, it means the world to you about how you can communicate with someone. And she was a great lady in a tiny physical package, and we will always remember her dearly. Now, I'm about to introduce Richard Pena, and I remember when she said, Richard Pena is taking Richard Roud's place. You will love him. I said, I don't know about that. I remember him in Chicago. He was an academic. Michael, you will love him. And the fact of the matter is, we do love him, and he is one of the best things that happened to this institution. So here's Richard Pena.
Thank you. It's an honor to have been invited to offer my thoughts and feelings about Joanne. In the fall of 1979, I had just returned to New York after a year of teaching at Berkeley. I was offering Introduction to Film Studies to 125 students without a TA on a Staten Island campus a good 90 minutes from my apartment. Eager to become part of the New York cinema scene and to get off Staten Island, I wrote a letter to what was then the Film Society, recounting a bit of my background and announcing my fervent desire to volunteer for the festival or in whatever activity the Film Society had. A few days later, while sitting in my Staten Island office, I received a phone call from, unbelievably, Joanne Koch, the Film Society's executive director, whom I had never met. She told me she had read my letter, and while there wasn't really anything for me to do at the Film Society, she encouraged me to keep at it. You'll get where you want to go. I was stunned that she personally had called me, but encouraged and inspired by her words. Years later, when I was actually working at the Film Society, I reminded her of this brief encounter. She had no memory of it whatsoever. Frankly, though, I couldn't be that surprised. The call was simply one of dozens, if not hundreds, of acts of kindness that Joanne performed over the years, often for total strangers, offering a smile and kind words, and sometimes even advice. If someone were to ask me for an image that captured the spirit of Joanne, it would be an open door. The door to Joanne's office was almost always wide open, and everyone felt free to come in whenever they wanted to talk about the Film Society, or movies in general, or politics, or romantic or family life, or just about whatever was on your mind. One of the subjects, as has been mentioned, that Joanne felt especially passionate about was the First Amendment and free speech in general. Nothing worked Joanne up more than any hint of censorship. In fact, a couple of people have already alluded to her fight for I Am Curious Yellow. What neither Wendy nor Michael mentioned was that she and Dick slept for months with copies of the film underneath their bed. When in my second year at the festival, we invited Roger and me, soon after General Motors had given a major gift to Jet Lincoln Center, Joanne assured me that it's none of their bleeping business. Joanne was delighted to face down anyone who would try to control whatever we had decided to screen. And as she was fond of saying, under her watch, the Film Society had been picketed by both lesbians and Roman Catholics, although not at the same time. Working as closely as I did with Joanne, there were times in which we disagreed, sometimes profoundly, about specific films or policies, whatever, in the thousands of myriad details that made up our programs. Yes, occasionally there were hurt feelings. But one thing I eventually learned was that even on those issues over which we were most at odds, Joanne would support me 150%, even when she felt I was making a mistake, in the hope that I would learn from the experience and not commit such an error again. Indeed, when she was correct, and when and if I would later admit that I had been wrong, she'd smile and say something like, "Nobody got killed." I owe Joanne a special debt for all the advice and support she gave me in terms of my family life. I was married in 1987. We had our first child in March of 1988 and began work at Lincoln Center 2 months later. Other children came, and I also began teaching at Columbia. Joanne would always check in on me about how things were going at home. She and Dick were both very fond of my wife, Karen, and she would continually remind me about how lucky I was to be married to her. She tried to make sure that I was spending enough time at home and would express annoyance if she learned that I had spent the weekend at the office. She was always warm and welcoming to our children and would make sure as they got older that they got to meet Nicole Kidman or Leonardo DiCaprio or whatever star was in the hall. One more story about Joanne and our children. In 1996, Chinese Prime Minister Jiang Zemin spoke at the United Nations, and afterwards he was scheduled to meet with President Clinton. For some reason, they decided to meet in the Kaplan penthouse on the 10th floor of this building. As it happened, that afternoon our babysitter was unable to work, and I had said I would pick up my son and daughter from their school. But when I tried to leave the office, I was stopped by the Secret Service, who told me the building was in lockdown. Seeing that I was upset, Joanne asked what was the problem. I explained, and Joanne said, "Wait here." About 10 minutes later, I was on my way to pick up my kids. Working with Joanne and the rest of the Film Society team was certainly the high point of my professional life. She certainly taught me a great deal, and her words and deeds come back to me all the time, causing smiles and sometimes even laughter. How wonderful to have been even a small part of a life so well lived. And now I introduce Marion Massoni.
I was hoping to make a grander entrance so that you could all admire the back of my jean jacket that's a great example of Joanne's patchwork. She said it was her masterpiece, but I'm sure that all the work she'd done was masterpieces for everybody, so I had to wear it today. So first I have to tell you how Joanne hired me. After I spent years running an off-Broadway theater company, programming children's media all over the city, I found myself out of work and started to take temp jobs. And I wound up temping at Lincoln Center as secretary to the Lincoln Center Board Corporate Council. Mind-numbingly boring work. I spent every spare moment I had that I wasn't typing, transcribing minutes to board meetings, looking for another job. And also, somebody convinced me at Lincoln Center to take the job permanently. They said, having Lincoln Center on your resume can't be bad. Turned out they were correct. Turned out that my desk was about 15 feet from the Film Society offices across the street, basically where the Film Center is now. So I first met Joanne at the Xerox machine that we all shared, and everybody else at the Film Society. And so Joanne would invite me to New York Film Festival press screenings. I got invited to new directors screenings. I got invited to CJ and Pavito's birthday parties, the terrier that Wendy mentioned. So I was still looking for jobs, And then one day, somebody from Playbill, who had offices down there, put a note on my desk that said, Marcy Bloom is leaving the Film Society. So I ran over to the Film Society, I talked to everybody there, and then I talked to Joanne. And Joanne said, you're overqualified, everybody has a friend who wants a job. I think a friend of Harlan's was like at the top of the list, and she said you'd have to start at the bottom. And I don't know if I really did this, but I felt like I was on my knees just saying, please, please hire me. So she said, I don't know, we'll see. And off I went. And about a week, 2 weeks later, it's about 8 o'clock at night, I am like transcribing more minutes to, some board meeting of Lincoln Center. And I was like, I'm not gonna be here much longer because they're gonna send me to an asylum because I'm going crazy. I was very upset, and I just felt like I was gonna burst into tears. So I jumped up from my desk to go into the ladies' room so I could cry. And when I walked by the Film Society entrance, Joanne was there standing talking to Joanna Nay, and she sees me and she pulls me into the doorway. And she says, we all love you here, and I'll find interesting things for you to do, so you'll come and work with us. And she pushed me back out into the hallway, and I went into the ladies' room and I cried. So, and she really, I think, saved my life by hiring me. Anyway, so here's an interesting story about Joanne, and much has been said, and everybody's talked about her, liking the good fight and not backing down. And this is all true. But she also knew when to keep quiet. In the late 90s, we'd selected a film for new directors, new films called Sick, The Life and Death of Bob Flanagan, Super Masochist. Bob Flanagan was a performance artist who had cystic fibrosis, and he used pain as part of his artistic practice. And one of the highlights of the film was, basically attaching his penis to a board to the tune of If I Had a Hammer. So, yeah, after you all go like this. Anyway, and this was back when all the screenings were all at MoMA, nothing was up here. And so the film's about to be screened at 6 o'clock at night at MoMA, and somebody from MoMA calls Joanne and says, you're gonna get a call from some lawyer. It had to do with music rights, and they're gonna want you not to show the film because there must have been a problem with the music. So Joanne hangs up the phone, she walks out into the bullpen of the office, and she announces, the Film Society is officially closed for the day. Don't anybody answer the phone. So we showed the film and lived to screen another day. Joanne taught me many things, and these are 3 of the things that she taught me. You may learn them from other people, but I learned from Joanne. No good deed goes unpunished. It's easier to ask for forgiveness and for permission, and stop talking when they say yes. Or she might have meant stop talking when I say yes because I kept going on and on and on when she'd already given me what I wanted. So, on a personal note, I adore Joanne, but she could be a real pain in the ass sometimes. She's always, always telling me what to do. And this is not work-related, where, of course, she could tell me what to do. We'd be out in the field, as she called it. Usually it was at a Max Mara sample sale. And and I'd find this thing to look at, but I'm like, oh, it's a little expensive. And she's like, I know how much you make. You can afford it, so buy it. And you can wear it to opening night. You can wear it to the gala. Contract negotiations I'd want to walk away from. She'd be like, no, and she'd push me back. And she would, once she called me like halfway around the world in the middle of the night to make some fine point about something. It's like, it's driving me crazy. And as recently as last year, when I decided that I was going to finally buy an apartment in New York City, every time I'd see her or I'd talk to her, anything, she's like going, no, you don't want 2 bedrooms, you want 1 bedroom. No, you don't want this in the apartment. And why are you doing this anyway? You have a perfectly good apartment in Brooklyn. Oh, God. But the thing is that she was always right, which is so annoying. I said it to her so many times, Joanne, I say it one last time. Thank you so much for being such a pain in my ass. I love you. And now you're going to hear from some more of Joanne's wonderful admirers, her grandchildren, I think beginning with Ben Gula. Yes? Oh, who's coming first? Here you are. Oh, all of them. Here they come. So I'm going to tell you who they all are, so they don't have to. We have Ben Gula, Eliza Koch, Charlie Koch, and Nicholas Koch. Thank you. Welcome, kids.
The 4 of us have the great privilege of representing Joanne's grandchildren today. There are 9 of us altogether, not nearly as many as she would have liked, but enough to keep her busy cooking and gift-giving as the seasons passed. When thinking about how to remember our grandmother, we each have very distinct impressions that together form the fingerprint of Joanne, or Yaba, as we called her. Like Leopold Bloom, James Joyce's protagonist in Ulysses, wandering through a Dublin cemetery, we knew generic inscriptions on the gravestones simply wouldn't cut it for our grandmother. Bloom imagines on a stone engraved with a saucepan the epitaph, "I cooked good Irish stew." So here are our inscriptions for Joanne, a grandmother that shattered every stereotype of what a grandmother should be and left these unmistakable forms seared like her famous sea scallops in our memories forever.
When I think about Joanne, I remember her inimitable style, her long silver ponytail, her collection of oversized clip-on earrings, her beautifully patterned textiles, and all types of Film Society swag, from the posters that adorned her walls, hinting at the glamour of her professional life, to a baby's day out beach towel. Joanne gifted that style to us, finding us unique apparel that was often trendier than we were. She had the stylistic chops to find and bestow fashionable sneakers in a limited edition colorway that made our teenage sneakerhead friends jealous, or edgy t-shirts from a Japanese brand that was still rare in the United States. She sewed Boro-style patches into our denim jackets and scarves, a craft that was at once grandmotherly and also modern, worldly, and elegant like her.
When I remember Yaba, I remember our family, together at the beach or in the apartment in New York, the kids partaking in semi to very naughty activities on the boardwalks of Saltaire, the hallways of Washington Square Village, while our parents ate and drank and had adult conversations around the table Yaba and Kik so expertly provisioned. Physically, there wasn't always much room. Fitting up to 10 of us into the Saltaire house was practically an act of magic. But emotionally, it always felt like there was space there for kids to be kids and adults to be adults. At Yaba's, you didn't have to perform. You were free to just be. And along the way, you learned, through osmosis, observation, and later imitation, how food could be delicious, movies could be excellent, and love could be lasting. The space she held for us felt safe and warm, and no matter what mischief we made or minor injuries we had incurred, when the night got dark, we had a table of slightly inebriated, well-fed grown-ups to come home to. I can't imagine who I would be today without our blended family, who came together around my grandparents' table, and I'm so grateful for the love and the lovers that made it so.
I have some emails from Joanne from the last few years, from when we both got into sewing. Me to fix the outdoor gear that I'm constantly breaking, and her to continue her lifelong traits of generosity and incredible taste. I kind of recall her bemusement, reflecting on what it felt like to learn something new and experience something totally different later in life. And of course, tokens of love and creativity flowed from her hand. I remember putting on a jean jacket that had been my father's, that had been embroidered with colors, that never really appeared in my wardrobe before, and as I slid it onto my shoulders, I could sort of feel my palette expand a little bit. So many interactions that we have every day slide across our consciousness without really leaving a mark, and that's never the case with Joanne. Things are either done with such love and intention or such effortless style that it could not fail to leave an impression. And so as kids, we kind of took little steps into the unknown with Joanne. Ate the Vidalia onion with liverwurst that your parents would never be able to get you to try, or watched a film from a perspective that you never would have considered, regardless of how your parents felt about it. And so you learned how to behave in the world a little differently and perceive it a little differently. Because how couldn't you, when it was delivered with such kind of high expectations and such love for you, for life, and for family?
When I think about Yaba, I remember a red wagon and a red Miata. I see the barren, ill-lit hallway that led to her Washington Square Village apartment and her pruning bushes and shrubs in the garden in Saltaire. I can taste the linguine and clam sauce and see a silver scoop digging into a fresh pint of coffee ice cream. I hear the sleepy lilt of Billie Holiday and tinkling of ice cubes. I see her beauty and, hanging down her back, that long silver ponytail, 5 scrunchies deep. I remember the way, when we were sitting in a movie theater, she would look over at me during some moving moment to see if I was feeling what she was feeling, both of us smiling at the fact that we were there together. Yaba was a master of manifesting the good life. To watch her continue to grow, change, and enjoy her life well into her 80s and 90s was inspiring. She told us often how happy she was with the life that she had lived, and she meant it every time. Yaba proved to us that personal joy and appreciation for life was always within our reach, and we could have it too by cultivating a love like she had for the world around her and for the stories we could find within it. On behalf of Lily, Peter, Sarah, Charlie, Nikki, Serena, Zach, Ben, and Eliza, we are so proud to carry these memories of Yaba with us on our denim and in our hearts forever. We love you.
Before I begin, I have a few thank yous to everyone who got up and said something. I know you all have opinions of Joanne, but you all stood up and said it. Everyone at Film at Lincoln Center, Dan Stern, Leslie Kleinberg, thank you so much. Maria Ruiz-Potsakos, Sarah Eaton, Jordan Raup, Katie Skelly, Laura Kern for the beautiful program, Marion, Joanne Koch, and Zach Gula. Thank you so much. All right. Let's go. I studied English in college, and as an English major, I took several writing classes. Sometimes the teacher would arrive in class, perhaps underprepared or overly hungover, and they would need 10 or 15 minutes to get their act together. They would go to the board and put up a writing prompt, a short cue that would supposedly spark a marvelously creative written response. Most of these left me marvelously blank for 13 out of the 15 minutes. But there was one that pushed my start button right away. This is what that teacher wrote on the board. My mother's clothes. Growing up, I rarely saw my mother in blue jeans. She was born into a family of Alsatian tailors and dressmakers, one of whom, my great-uncle Leon, co-founded Sulca & Company, an internationally renowned haberdashery that custom-made silk ties, shirts, smoking jackets, and robes for the likes of Clark Gable and the Duke of Windsor. My mother was born knowing how garments were made and how to wear them. When we were small, my sister Michelle and I didn't wear clothing. Clothing is an uncountable noun, non-specific, vague. We wore outfits. Coordinated items, carefully chosen to signal that someone loved us and cared about our appearance. Shopping for school outfits every autumn was easy, as dress codes were standard in those days. Blouses and skirts or jumpers, cardigans, bobby socks or knee-highs, saddle shoes or Oxfords. In short, we were dressed like the Catholic school daughters of a Jewish mother. Mom's style in those years was typical of the era: sweater sets, cigarette pants, very early Mary Tyler Moore, and not June Cleaver. I began to notice her interest in fashion trends when I heard her talking about Rudi Gernreich. When you think about the 60s look, you're thinking of Rudi Gernreich. Color-blocked A-line mini dresses worn with short white go-go boots and a jaunty little white patent leather cap. He also created a bathing suit that grabbed the world's attention. It was topless. By today's standards, it wasn't radical. It was a bathing suit bottom with two straps anchored in the center front that ran between a woman's bare breasts and over the shoulders and down the back. But then the suit was to fashion what Stravinsky's Rite of Spring was to music. Scandalous, obscene, revolutionary, fabulous. I'm pretty sure Mom never bought one, because if she had, you would have seen her wearing it as she scampered around the beach at Cannes. But she did go topless that year. The family acquired a 1964 Ford Mustang convertible. First year off the assembly line. And oh, how my mother loved that car. It was maroon with black interior. You or I might drive a car like that up the Pacific Coast Highway or up through New England to see the autumn leaves. On a beautiful day, my mother would put down the top, Lotus in the back seat, crank up the radio, and speed down scenic Route 17 to the Loehmann's Discount Fashion Center in Paramus, New Jersey. For anybody under the age of 68, Loehmann's was the first big box discount store I ever saw. It was an airplane hangar, filled wall to wall with industrial garment racks hung with all manner of women's clothing. No frills, no decoration, just stuff. This was her happy place, her recreation and release. For the rest of her life, shopping for clothing in New York and around the world would consume almost as much time as her job. Indeed, she believed that it was part of her job to present herself not only in a way that embodied the status of her position, but the ethos of the organization. My mother did not dress for success. She dressed for respect. When Mom married Dick, she found a partner who shared her love of all things sartorial. Dick was, in the words of ZZ Top, a sharp-dressed man. From Dick, I learned interesting words like ascot and cummerbund. I cannot overstate the way Dick and Mom complimented. I'm an English major. I can use both of those spellings in one sentence. If you look closely at a couple of pictures in the slideshow, they're actually wearing the same thing. He knew how to critique her weekly department store and boutique purchases with respect and affection, rather than a simple thumbs up or down. They loved shopping together. They loved getting dressed up together. And as I think about it, I don't know if either of them would have looked quite as good without the other. At the end of her life, Mom's outfits were simpler. Soft cotton pull-on pants, Uniqlo, or New York Film Festival t-shirts, turtlenecks and sneakers, until she stopped wearing shoes altogether and just wore socks with those little non-skid dots on the bottom. She couldn't walk down to Soho and browse the shops for the newest Issey Miyake or Agnes B, but she was still asking for new books to read, new films to watch, and TV programs. Retro was not a word in her vocabulary. A few nights before she died, I watched her puttering around her bedroom, laying out her ensemble for the next day. Uniqlo lounge pants with the big purple flowers, a long-sleeve cotton top, and her little socks. She was planning ahead, the way she always did. And I have a personal note. Mom's absentee ballot arrived the day after she died. Don't let that happen to you. If you value the arts, if you value free expression, if you value women and children, go out and vote today and bring your friends and family. Thank you all. And join us next door.